Let's begin our session on the topic An Actor Prepares, An Actor Reflects by Naseeruddin Shah in conversation with Parvathy Thiruvothu. Let's begin our session.
എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. എല്ലാവരെയും കണ്ടതിൽ വലിയ സന്തോഷം. ഞാൻ പ്രോംപ്റ്റ്ലി ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലേക്ക് സ്വിച്ച് ചെയ്യുന്നതായിരിക്കും. A hearty welcome to you, sir, to KLF, to Calicut. Ratna ma'am, I know you're sitting over there, but we cannot not say this. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to open up my note because this is the first time I believe I am actor struck. Because when you were doing this movie Waiting, Anu Menon's Waiting, the EP of that film, who's a very dear friend of mine, Nancy, she called me and I had just moved to Kochi trying to make it as an actor. And she said, "Do you know how to play tennis or badminton even?" And I said, "No." Nasir sir is looking like for a partner to play, but I'm like, I can learn, I can come, like I can swing it, like just any chance to be able to meet you, sir, and have a conversation.
Thank you, Parvathy. Thank you very much. I really admire all you have done, and I'm completely in awe of the stands you have taken and the statements you've made, and the courage that you have displayed. I'm absolutely in awe of that. Thank you for what you have done.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's incredible honor coming from you. I will be referring to this. I'm very sorry about this, but I know our session is called An Actor Prepares, An Actor Reflects, and through KLF, this is my selfish endeavor to prepare through your reflections. How do you think preparation and reflection sustains as an architecture within an actor over a period of time? How does it move through you? Or is there an end to this incessant surge of where does preparation end and where must one halt and reflect so that we can bring it back to the table?
I don't think there's an end to it. I really feel that the older you get, the more of life that you see, the more experiences you have, the more people you meet. It changes you, definitely every day, which is why I believe that there is no such thing as the perfect actor or a perfect performance, because the same actor who you may find very, very moving one day could be perhaps move you in a different way on the next day, because in any case on the stage, every day's performance is different. Every audience is different from each other. I'm often asked, which is the best audience you have performed to? And I don't believe that there is such a thing as a good or a bad audience. There are only good and bad performances. And you can change a bad audience into a good one by the quality of your work. And as far as preparation is concerned, the first rule that I follow, and which I try to drill into the young actors I work with, is learn your lines and don't bump into the furniture. And if you can do that, the first stage of the battle is won. And there is this myth which has been coined by lazy actors, there's no other word I can use for them, called over-rehearsal, which I think is absolute nonsense. I think the more you rehearse, the better you get. Our teacher, my teacher, Mr. Ibrahim Al-Qazi at the National School of Drama, always used to chastise us actors and say, you actors think you have the right to perform without even looking after your instruments. Can you think of any instrumentalist, any vocalist, any musician, anyone who would dare perform without respecting his instrument, without cleaning it, without practicing on it? And the amount of work that a dancer does, for example, the amount of work that an instrumentalist does is a million times more than what any actor does. And yet they are so humble in their approach when they come in, and you actors feel you have a right to come and stride around on the stage. And so I'm never fully satisfied with anything I've done. Of course, I know I've received praise and all that, but I don't let it go to my head. I feel that it's a lifelong search, and it gives me a reason to live. It gives me a reason to work.
Thank you, sir. This actually brings me to another story that connects me to you. At the very beginning of my acting career, I remember reading on, I can't remember which magazine, I must have been 17, 18 at the time. And I had just begun auditioning, and I had not gone to film school or acting school or anywhere. So I was just going to learn at the job. So I was reading copiously as many interviews I could find, and I was surprised that I couldn't find a lot of interviews I could, like, where actors are generously sharing their techniques or methods or thoughts, or just generally saying what happens to them when they get into this skill set, so to speak, or how they hone it. And you said this specific line which has stayed tattooed in my brain, is that you might get a great co-actor, you might get a good co-actor, but you might get a bad one too, but that's no excuse for you to do a bad job. And that has stayed with me, and the way it has held me in great stead for 18 years. I have come to at a time when I was unlucky enough to find a selfish co-actor. I took my lens out so I didn't have to see this person. So I could just, act in my imagination.
Imagine him here.
So I've always gone back to that, and much like that, that one must earn the right to improvise. One must know their lines and know their script well enough. Only then do you earn the right to improvise. So these are tenets, the most basic tenets that have stayed with me even before I became a full-fledged actor. And I know you said that in another interview that it was at the age 14 when you were on stage for the first time and you realized you belong. What are some of the tenets that have stayed with you over the years, like this, that has always sort of pulled you back to your center, so to speak?
See, as a youngster in school, I was a very withdrawn sort of person. I still am to a certain extent. I wasn't a popular student in school. I wasn't good at studies. I wasn't good at games. I wasn't good at anything, in other words. And I had two brothers, older brothers. And if you're in a boarding school with two older brothers, both of whom are brilliant in different fields, then, and you are the good for nothing. So that is what I was. Our school did several plays every year. I was never chosen. I was never even considered for any of them because I was known as Dormouse, the person who keeps sleeping all the time in class. Now I did, and in fact, what happened before I went on stage was I happened to encounter a person called Geoffrey Kendall, who ran a troupe called Shakespeareana, and they came to our school every year to perform. Sometimes Shakespeare, sometimes Shaw, sometimes Oscar Wilde, sometimes Oliver Goldsmith. And the very same Shakespeare plays, which would put us to sleep in class, suddenly became magical when I saw them. And that's when I realized that what Mr. Kendall is doing is absolutely invaluable. He is not only coming onto the stage to show off what he can do, and what he could do was quite unbelievable to me as a 12, 13-year-old boy. I saw him change from Shylock into Malvolio, from Malvolio into Othello, and from Othello into Hamlet in the blinking of an eye. And I thought, wow, what a versatile actor he is. I've never seen an actor like this. Many years later, I met him and worked with him in a very brief part. And I asked him, don't you have any regrets? Mr. Kendall only performed in Asia. He toured all of Asia, schools, performing in schools and performing in universities and colleges, never doing a public performance to earn money. And I asked him, don't you have any regret that you didn't stay on in England and become Sir Geoffrey Kendall or Lord Geoffrey Kendall? Because I said, I think you're greater than any of these actors I've seen. And he just brushed the compliment aside and he said, look, I'm not an actor, I'm a missionary. And my mission is to spread Shakespeare. And that's what I realized. That is what an actor's job is. Because I, as a child, was very withdrawn, as I told you earlier. When I went on stage for the first time, it was like I was terrified for a few seconds. But then I spoke something and the audience responded. And that was the first time in my life, I have to say, because I didn't have a very easy relationship with my parents or my family. I felt the sense of acceptance. I felt the sense of approval. And I realized that I had got through to them, which is something I could never do in real life. Nobody ever listened to what I was saying. And because of that, I seldom spoke. But on the stage, when this happened, I felt I had come home. I felt this is where I belong. And from that day onward, I just stayed, have stayed on the stage because I intend to die on the stage. I hope it doesn't happen too soon, though. But
That's a tricky one to applaud.
the quality of being a missionary, of reaching out to people whom you don't know personally and getting across to them, receiving their energy and transmitting your own energy to them to stimulate the audience's imagination. That is what I consider to be the magic of theatre, not fancy sets and all that sort of thing.
How did you find that changing when it became cinema? Because I've also heard you speak about how cinema does not challenge one as an actor as much as theatre does, but also certain self-preservation an actor requires in cinema more than in theatre because of the noise of it that just sort of engulfs you. As you started acting in cinema and as well as continuing in theatre, did you figure a set of like did you have an artillery where you could work to protect yourself from the
My
noise of-
artillery was my dreams and the actors who had influenced me in cinema. Because I studied film acting in Pune at the Film Institute. And over there, I was exposed to films from countries I didn't know made films. Of course, I knew about Japan because of Akira Kurosawa, and I knew about Sweden, and I knew about France. But I didn't know that Bulgaria made movies, Hungary made movies, Czechoslovakia made movies, Canada made movies, Korea made movies. I had no idea. And when I saw some of these performances, particularly in the European movies, it struck me that this is the kind of actor I want to be. How do they do this? I can understand how Sir Laurence Olivier did what he did. Sheer hard work. Or what the great Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune did. Sheer hard work, pure physical labor. And I often wondered when I saw some of these Swedish and Czech actors, how do they manage to be so truthful? How do they do it? Because it is all artifice anyway. Acting is a pretending. And I began to understand the difference between pretending and being. And the best advice I received when I began my film acting career from Mr. Shyam Benegal, because I was very nervous and I didn't want to go wrong. And I said, you know, Shyam, I've never acted before a camera. In fact, I'm very nervous in front of a camera. Now, those who are from my generation will know what I'm talking about, because taking a photograph was a big event for us when we were children. And then you had to take the photograph, then give the negative for development, and then wait for that to be printed. And if one photograph went bad, that was a waste of 2 rupees or something. So I was very terrified. And Shyam said to me, the same way as on the stage you try to make contact with everyone who's there, in film acting, you need to make contact with the camera. Because the camera is ultimately the eye of every man in the audience. So don't be afraid of the camera, befriend the camera. And incidentally, what happened to me around the same time was I was working in a student film at the Film Institute, and they were shooting in my room in the hostel. And we went on shooting till very late, and we were going to start again very early. So they decided to leave the camera there in my room, incidentally, facing my bed. And I fell asleep on my bed with the camera looking at me. And when I woke up in the morning, I just felt that the camera and I have become friends. I'm not afraid of him anymore. What is he? He's not going to bite me. He's only recording what I do, so what I do must be worthy of being received by the camera.
Wow. I still remember the first time I looked into the depths of the lens, and it just became an eye. It just became a very visceral, it's like it had muscles or something. And then for some reason I realized I can lie. And that brings me to the other stories that I've also heard you say is like good liars make good actors, or like I was good at lying as a kid or something like in jest. My father knows well that I was very good at lying. I've only gotten beating once from him because of how good I was at lying.
You must not have lied well that time.
That was the one time.
Yeah, it's called. Somebody wrote a book about acting called "Lies Like Truth." It's a bit of a paradox, but that is really what it is. And unless you can inject truth into your performances, I think the audience will reject you. There is, of course, I'm not one of those people, one of those actors who can, thrill an audience by dancing or by looking handsome or anything like that. I realize that the weapon that I have is the truth I can convey to the observer. And in order to do that, I must be truthful to myself, and I must work at it. And frankly, I've never been nervous, except for that one day when I was 14 years old and I went on stage for the first time. I have never ever, this may sound very vain, but it's true. I never feel the slightest nervousness when I'm required to act, except if I have to dance to a song with a girl who's younger than my daughter. That's kind of difficult. And I've never been able to do that well. It's a shortcoming. I don't know whether it's a loss or a gain, because while I was at the institute, most of my classmates were dancing to film songs all day and were very good at it. People like Mithun Chakravarti and Shakti Kapoor and so on. And they became very good at that. I never bothered to learn all that because I never thought I'd have to do it. I decided to learn the nuts and bolts of my job rather than to depend on any kind of an appeal, which I may or may not have. And I knew that if I know how to do my job, how long can I be held down? I cannot. I will do my best as much as I can. And in fact, I've never understood why actors get nervous before they act. There are many actors I've met who say, oh, I get butterflies in my stomach. I need to go to the bathroom 25 times. I'm sweating. My heart is beating. And I say, what's wrong with you? You are doing what you always wanted to do. You're doing the job you love. You're doing the job you fought with your parents to do. You ran away from home to do this job. What is there to be nervous about? When I'm performing on the stage, the only thing I feel is impatience. When will this thing start? When will the third bell go?
I'm very happy to report that everything that you're saying just feels like just about 18 years of you having whispered it into my ears in one way or the other through one interview, but which is so true. I totally lose it when you have to wait for half a day for the first shot to begin. And I'm like, just now, let's start already. And your theatre company, Motley, in terms of, because I've again heard you say this whole dancing, acting business, which you did do at one point. How did your relationship with cinema sort of sustain so that, because you had Motley with you, Like, is there something that you could find a balance in terms of you could go whenever you wanted to, when you found something exciting enough where you can be all of you as an actor, but then you could do a lot? How did that help? Or
Well, I've also done some movies which I did only for the money. That's the simple truth. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of to work for money. I mean, what do we all do? But those are jobs I regret. Fortunately, people don't remember the bad work you did. As an actor, they remember only the good things that you did. And my relationship with cinema has stayed constant because of my association, which was pure chance of being associated with the serious cinema in India, in Bombay. I never fancied myself as a person fighting off 100 gangsters or, jumping off a roof or all that, though I have done some jumping off roofs and so on. But I never fancied myself as that. I always fancied myself as an actor who would be able to participate in cinema which will be a record of its times. I don't, it's difficult to consider it an art. It's a craft, I would say. And I think the most important function that serious cinema serves is not to change the world. I don't think anybody's thinking gets changed after seeing a film, no matter how wonderful it may be. It may help you raise a few questions. But the really important function of cinema, to my mind, is to act as a record of its times. Those are the most valuable films because these films will be seen 100 years later. And if 100 years later, people want to know what the India of 2025 was like, and they find a Bollywood film, that would be a big tragedy, I think. And that's why I've considered it my responsibility to participate in such films, and also because I enjoy playing real people. I have been completely unable to play larger than life characters, unlike my dear friend Prakash, who can play a larger than life character and who can play a truthful person as well. I envy that quality about him, and I don't think there are too many people who can do that successfully. So, to me, truth has been of maximum importance, and as I said, it should paint an honest picture of what we are going through today, and that is why the films which are fewer now in number, in Hindi at least, which try to paint a truthful picture, often get suppressed or not released, or they find no viewers when they are released because they don't have all the popular ingredients that a successful film needs. But to me, the success or failure of a movie I do is of no importance to me. What is of importance to me is that it gets across to the few people who watch it. Just like I was the only one in my school who was affected by Mr. Jeffrey Kendall, I feel that if the work I do affects even one person in the world, that is still good enough for me.
so, speaking of current situation of cinema that you touched upon, there's this implosion of insecure hyper masculinity, which is very quite desperate. Um, you did touch upon in Nikhil Taneja's interview, which I absolutely enjoyed listening to you, about being in touch with one's femininity and bringing that into the craft. And I have heard, and I'm very lucky to be surrounded by so many people, allies as well, but quite few numbers, but several women with whom we have been exploring that. What does it mean for us? How do we understand it? And how do we project it onto each other when we listen? But I'm curious to know with your colleagues, especially male colleagues, when you have conversations regarding this aspect, Are there conversations at all with younger actors, perhaps, or
I have to admit, very few. And it's pointless having a conversation with somebody whose mind is not going to change. I do not approve of these films which celebrate masculinity and which run down the femininity of the characters, films which debase women, films which, as a stand-up comedian once said somewhere, I forget his name, but he's a great stand-up comedian, is that he was talking in America and he says, I come from a country where we worship women in the day and gang rape them at night. And I think that's really true. And the success of these sickening films, I don't know if it's a reflection of our society or if it is a reflection of the fantasies of our society. It's always been a moot point whether cinema affects society or society affects cinema. I think the relationship is mutual and it goes both ways. And I think that films which feed into the secret fantasies of men who, in their heart of hearts, look down on women, these are being fed. And it is actually very scary to see how much approval such films get from the common viewer. It's very terrifying, and it does explain the horrendous things that happen to women in a lot of places in our country.
it's true, sir. In terms of bringing that femininity in your characters or finding them in the screenplay, sometimes, I mean, everything you need to know should be ideally in the screenplay. You needn't really look further. But sometimes, have you found that there is scope of it with the writer to discuss and bring those elements forward? How would you go about it? For example, your character in Gehraiyan, you're playing Deepika's character's father for sure, but then there is that one scene where there's a conversation about forgiveness, which again is now tattooed in my... I think I definitely saw my father and his eyes in terms of, I haven't met, he's the first man that I have met who has infused masculine and feminine in the best way possible. And I saw that in the vulnerability that you brought forward. So I have often been accused of having too many discussions with my writers and directors. Oh my God, here she comes. She has those questions. And I wonder if that is something you like to engage with your directors and writers too.
I would rather than femininity, I would use the word humanity. Because why should we consider women to be something separate from us? We are the same. And we have equal rights and we have equal responsibilities and we have equal strengths. I consider women to be the stronger sex, in fact, rather than the weaker sex. And it is high time that women stood up and found their place. It's high time that women fought for their rights, and it's high time that we accepted the fact that they are equal in human terms. If I were offered a part where I'm supposed to be brutal to a woman or to another man even, I don't think I would ever do it. I would also not subscribe to the hyper patriotic, in inverted commas, nationalistic kind of worldview that a lot of our films propagate. And in fact, what is heartening is that not all these films are being accepted by the audience. I think the audience is beginning to see through the hypocrisy of these movies.
Absolutely, I agree, sir. This is a bit of a roundabout way to ask you into categories and identities that some characters are put in, mostly with actors who are women. There's this lover girl trope, or the good girl trope, or the bold girl trope, or the village girl trope. I was at one point put in the lover girl trope. So my dramatic arc for the character was always either fall in love, fall out of love, chase love, wait for love, suffer in love. It was great. It was a bouquet for sure. And I did need to put food on the table. So I did continue exploring, but my one criteria was that I want to find who the person is first and how she loves. And that's got to be different. It's not just, not every woman loves the same way. So now let's find out who she is, who the person is. And that, I think, ensured that the way a Tessa would love would be different than how a Panimalar would love. And I really enjoyed that process until I think I jinxed it. And now I can do with some love stories, but I'm not getting those anymore. But just to go with this trope aspect of it to get to a point, there is the fathers that you have portrayed. There is Andre in The Father, which I had the absolute pleasure of watching you live at Prithvi, which I hats off to you, sir. It's beyond what I could. I would love to be your understudy at some point. I'm going to use this opportunity to immediately plug that in. And then we have Lalit Verma in Monsoon Wedding. And then we have Gehraiyan. And we also have Salman Habib in Zindagi Milegi Na Dobara. These are all fathers, but these are all actual. I can't tell the difference. They're not the same fathers. It's not a trope. There is no way that you would be portraying a character which is put in a category of wo hero ka father and heroine ka, that thing. And then the person comes forward. And forgiveness looked very different to the father in Gehraiyan and the father in Salman Habib. The way he said, that's my sachai, and the sachai that he tells Deepika's character in Gehraiyan. And when these characters are placed in the screenplay, like Andre is throughout there in the play. It is about him, his journey. But some of these other characters are placed at one point, a pivotal point. How do you explore and find these personalities to come forth and break the trope?
There is a saying that the child is the father of man. And I think what kind of father you are depends on what kind of children you have. You mold your personality according to your children's needs and your children's requirements and your children's attitudes to life. I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think parents have that much effect on their children as parents like to believe they do. And a lot of parents make the mistake of trying to live their children's lives for them. And I know, because, and in each of these cases that you're mentioning, the child that I was dealing with was a different kind of child. And so I had to adjust my relationship with him or her according to his or her personality. I really think that is what determines. I know that since we had children, I have become a different person. I was very anxious when we were expecting our first son. I predicted it would be a son. I don't know why. Nothing to do with hypermasculinity. I just wanted to play football and cricket with him, you know. And Ratna wanted to give him pretty little earrings and all, but that didn't happen. But I was very nervous about what kind of a father I'd be. And I think whatever I have become as a father is because of my children. And to come back to the earlier thing that you mentioned, Parvathy, about the tropes, it's unfortunate that it's always the woman who's shown as suffering in love. I think there are many more men in the world who suffer in love than women. I don't think there are too many women who pine away. There may be a few Meena Kumaris in the world, but I think men are much more inclined to consider themselves the victim, the hunted, rather than the hunter. And then when they miss, they kick themselves. And for example, I was labeled as a serious actor because the first few films I did were serious, meaningful films about the Gujarat Milk Cooperative or about the oppression of peasants by the zamindars or about the 1857 War of Independence. And so I was always this furious, rebellious kind of a person I had to play. And then when I started working in popular movies, I was invariably given a scene where I had to shout and scream for no particular reason. And I'd say, why is this scene here? And they would say, well, because you do it very well. When you are angry, you look very good. So I said, well, I think you should ask my children about that. But these tropes are so dangerous and very hard once you get labeled to fall out of that category. And I don't believe in categories. I believe that not only every actor, but every human being has immense possibilities of being another kind of person. So it's not that you assume a personality. I don't, when I play a part which is different from what I am, and in fact, what I am, I'm not at all sure about. I feel I have many people within me, and I'm sure everybody feels that. But as an actor, that has been a blessing. And this is what I tell my students when they ask me, how do we play a character who's different from you? So what I tell them is, no character is different from you. Try to recognize that potential within yourself of being a lecherous gangster who produces movies which he hopes will fail, or a ruthless subedar who lusts after a village woman, or a young villager who is rebellious and opposed to the city folk because he hates them. Try to find the person. Try to find the person within you, and you will find him. Because we should not, and that is where I make a distinction between stars and actors. Because stars have to do what the audience desires. They have to be predictable. The audience does not want to be surprised by a star, whereas an actor is capable of exploring more possibilities within himself and finding out more about himself, even the unpleasant parts of himself, the ugly parts of himself, the darker parts of himself or herself. I think that's an actor's responsibility to do that. And if you don't explore all these possibilities, you're not doing justice to yourself as an actor.
I agree, sir. I've been asked to wrap up. I don't know how time flew, but apparently we only have about 7 minutes,
7 minutes.
and the audience wants to ask you a few questions. But I'm going to be selfish and ask one more question. But this is more, I think, because we are at KLF, and Kozhikode is also my native place. I'm from here. And I'm very happy to be finally, this is the first time I'm actually in KLF though. So it's all kinds of wonderful. I've always felt having learned English literature in college has held me in good stead to continue in my acting career as well. Keep going back to books and worlds, letting the audience forget you for a while, and then you come back and try to create a new world. And that being the one relationship between the audience and the actor that's sacrosanct. How is your relationship, and how have you applied literature and the skill, the craft that is acting, that has worked for you?
Well, literature, reading, and which is a habit which seems to be dying in most parts of the country. Most people read on their telephones or they read on their computers, but they don't realize what they're missing out on, because it teaches you things you did not expect, it teaches you things you did not want, or it says something which you felt you wanted to say but could not say in these words. And therefore, I consider reading to be of prime importance. I wasn't very fond of reading when I was in school. I was fond of cricket and I was fond of watching movies. About the only two things I was fond of. But my introduction to theatre and the plays that I have read have informed all that I know about people, about the world. I cannot repay the debt I owe to theatre, because it changed my life. It has taught me almost everything that I know about the world, and it has exposed me to playwrights of different countries. And that is why I always prefer working in the theatre, because you have access to the writers of 1,000 years ago. You can choose a Sanskrit play, you can choose an ancient Greek play, you can choose an ancient Chinese play and perform it. You don't exactly get that kind of literature acting in movies. And another thing that I would like to add, which I should have said when I was talking about the distinction between an actor and a star. I saw a play, one of the few plays abroad which really bowled me over, and that was called The Lion King. And it was magical because there was no fancy settings and gigantic sets and all that sort of thing. It was pure theater. There were only the actors and there were puppets. And there were some life-sized puppets. Two of the characters were life-sized puppets manipulated by actors who had their hands in the puppet's hands and their feet in the puppet's feet. And I don't know how they manipulated the head. And those puppets to me came alive. I never looked at the person manipulating the puppet. And that was a great lesson, that when you perform, the audience should watch the performance, not you. And these actors who are fully visible and who you can see are giving the performance, they are speaking for the puppet. They are making the puppet behave as they want it to behave, but no one looks at them. Now that should not be a shortcoming if nobody says you were very good, but they say we liked the character affected us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think I must hand you over to the audience now, otherwise...
We have 3 minutes and 56 seconds.
Yes.
Now it's time for audience interaction. If you have any questions, please go ahead, but in a very few words.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening,
ma'am. Well, first of all, I must say this was a wonderful session. It's my first time coming to Code and the Literature Festival.
Welcome.
So, like you said that you started your career with critically acclaimed films like Manthan, Bazaar, Junoon. But sir, as an actor, I have a question, sir. What do you think was your most challenging role where you felt you have given your best and you feel you have lived the character?
I don't believe that you need to live the character. Please sit down. I don't believe in trying to become the character. There was a time when I did believe that, when I was studying at the Film Institute. But I think this is, becoming the character is not only impossible, it is undesirable. Supposing an actor playing Macbeth becomes Macbeth. Supposing an actor playing Othello becomes Othello. What's going to happen? Chaos. You have not to, and I believe it is not necessary to understand a character you play. It's difficult enough to understand yourself. How are you supposed to understand Mirza Ghalib? How am I supposed to understand Einstein? How am I supposed to understand Andre? How am I supposed to understand Mahatma Gandhi? I cannot. It will take me 7 lifetimes and I still won't have got anywhere nearer. What you must understand is the situation, the character's situation. And to answer your question in brief, the most challenging thing I've ever had to do, as I said before, was to run around a tree singing a song.
Do we have another over here? Someone can pass the mic on, please. Thank you.
Nasir sir, this is not a question, this is a request. Do you think we can conclude this without a couplet from Ghalib?
All right. Ghalib, you know, Mr. Gulzar had announced when I was a student at the Film Institute that he was making a film on Ghalib starring Sanjeev Kumar Sahab, the late Sanjeev Kumar, who was also a great actor, but who had become somewhat complacent, I feel, towards when he became very successful. So I was infuriated on reading this news. And I wrote Gulzar Bhai a letter and sent him a photograph, which cost me 5 rupees, and that was a fortune for me at that time. And I wrote him a letter saying, I am the actor you're looking for. Don't cast Sanjeev Kumar, he can't speak Urdu. As it happened, Gulzar Bhai never got that letter. And then he could not raise, and then Sanjeev Kumar Sahab fell ill, so the film got shelved. And then many, many years later, Gulzar asked me if I would play Ghalib, and I couldn't believe this was happening. So I went and met him and I told him about this, and he said, I never received your letter. But that didn't matter because the fact that I played him introduced me to Urdu poetry, which I always had earlier looked down upon. I considered great poetry to be written only in English, which was my ignorance. And when I discovered Ghalib, I really felt like an ignorant ignoramus, that I knew nothing about him. And I began to read his his poetry and his letters. And I think he has written some of the most profound things I've ever read. He was 100 years before T.S. Eliot, but what he says is as profound as anything Eliot said. And since you've asked for a couplet, the most apt one, I think, is from one of his poems, where he says, हुई मुद्दत के गालिब मर गया पर याद आता है, हुई मुद्दत के गालिब मर गया पर याद आता है, वो हर एक बात पे कहना कि यूं होता तो क्या होता. And there's another one which I love, which is, हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत लेकिन, हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत लेकिन दिल के खुश रखने को गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है.
Very apt. Yes. Thank you, sir. Do we have time for one more question? It says 000 very glaringly. Should I wrap it up? I think so. I've been asked to. Sir, I don't think words would suffice to say what this has meant for us. You being here, speaking to us in such detail what your experiences have been. For me, this is no exaggeration. This is meeting my guru, who has just not known he is my guru for 18 years or so. So thank you so much for this honor. Thank you so much.
It's an honor for me, Parvathy. It's an honor for me. I feel very, very proud that I'm sharing this platform with someone like you.
Thank you so much.
We are wrapping up this session. Thank you so much, speakers.